The city of Milwaukee, like a lot of urban spaces, is almost completely covered in concrete and buildings with only a few cracks of green space and parks left over. But believe it or not, there's people who actually like this and would like more of it instead of letting us finish the job. Are these people crazy and evil, or merely stupid? We're asking these questions and more in this episode of the Shepherd Traffic Podcast. I'm Joel Roberts.
I'm Colin Haynes. We're the startup Shepherd Traffic. We make transportation and analytics software to make cities beautiful, livable, and human-centered as possible. So Joel, what are we talking about today?
Yeah, we're talking about these crazy people who want more parks instead of getting the rest of the green space paved over and turned into houses and businesses.
Hey, now I'm one of these crazy people.
You're one of these crazy people.
I am.
How have you held it back so long? All right, let's play devil's advocate here, because
Sure.
you're clearly the devil.
Sure.
But what do you like about these places?
Well, it's an escape from the city. You can think of on one end you have this industrial hellscape with these buildings that are same color, same shape, lacking any sort of art or beauty. And then you have nature, which is, it's full of blues and greens, and it's very peaceful. You hear the sounds of the birds, so it's a harmony. And so the city's cool because it sort of allows that to exist alongside the craziness with the sirens and the people bumping their music and the terrible smells.
Yeah, but I always thought that the point of the city is that you're away from nature, right? You don't have to be near all that stuff. You wake up at 2 a.m. to the beautiful music of an ambulance, sirens wailing, and cars driving through your neighborhood. Like, if you want to be out in nature, you live in the country, right? I just don't understand why you want both of those things in the same place. Anyway, so I actually heard from somebody, from a mutual friend of ours, Mr. Badlaw, that you actually had a little bit of an experiment as to see something about parks. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so I'm a nerd. I like the quantification realm. And so I wanted to see what it's like to go completely immersed in nature, and then what it's like completely on the opposite side. So from the trail where it's completely isolated, it's pretty much just you and nature, and then walking along the busiest streets where it's full of concrete. There's part of the sidewalk that's ripped out, and just not as enjoyable. So I wanted to see what the difference was between the first and then the second observation there. And so it's more of an observation than an experiment.
Right, and so you're doing quantification. What exactly are you measuring?
So part of it is just subjective mood, so going in and then rating how I felt afterwards. And then part of it as well is testing some physiological metrics. It basically just means things like, how's your heart rate doing? What's your stress level? How fast are you breathing? Things like this. And frankly, it's directional, right? It's not going to tell you perfectly because, once again, this isn't an experiment. We're not lab rats. We're not, perfectly isolating all these variables. So it's telling you something, right? It's going to ask future questions. It's going to allow you to ask future questions.
All right, so you did the same basic walk from same origin destination.
Yep.
And you did 3 different routes where one was like all concrete. Beautiful, beautiful concrete. Another one was more trees and then another one was just
even more,
just all trees in the Oak Leaf Trail, right?
Yes.
All right. So what'd you find about it?
Well, so going in, I expected the park to be the best, which it was. I was the happiest. I know that's like nails on a chalkboard to you. But
it's a sign of mental illness.
But it is. So that was the best overall. But what I was really surprised at is actually the biggest relative increase was from totally barren, totally concrete to somewhere in the middle. That relative increase was actually the greatest from the circumstance where it was just walking and almost no trees, almost no canopy, and then to a much more shaded, much more green space. And so I was surprised that the relative jump from those two was much greater than the relative jump from the second in the middle to the park itself, to the trail, to the Oak Leaf Trail.
All right, so as long as you a little bit broke up the perfection of buildings and concrete and just the heat caking off the sidewalk with a little bit of these disgusting trees, That was enough to make you and your sick mind feel better. And then the park was the best overall, obviously. But the biggest difference for you and your sick brain was just having some trees and some green space. That's about it?
That's one way to put it. Yeah.
Huh.
And obviously, Absolute was the park. The park was the best. But that jump surprised me, and so, in full transparency, I didn't expect that. I'm one to advocate for as many parks as possible. Parks they're beautiful, they're green, and I know that doesn't quite resonate with you, Joel, but it's what it is. Agree to disagree. But that lift, that bump from just a little bit more greenery, a little bit more of the trees was surprising. Like I really didn't expect that. And so what does that tell me? I mean, it seems like even those real small marginal improvements seem to go a long way. So even planting a tree, I know it's just adding more to the already hellscape
I know.
of trees.
Well, let me show you on the other side of why I think that there should never be any parks and why it makes no sense, right? So think about it. So imagine there's a neighborhood and there's an empty plot of land or an empty lot, right? And maybe someone at the city wants to turn that into a park, and someone else, the developer, wants to turn that into houses or like a apartment building or something, or just a business, right? So when I look at that, and I think from the city's point of view, if you build a park, the city owns it, the city maintains it, they gotta pay money for it, and no one makes any money, right? Your property taxes on that lot are now zero. No property taxes. Whereas if you build something, then all of a sudden people are paying property taxes, and you fund the greater community.
But what about the circumstance where that's actually not just a binary yes or no, either revenue or not, but think of how that actually has the network effect. Think of being close to that park and how that affects the surrounding area. I mean, it's not just a zero-sum game. It's that green space, however little it is beneficial to the values of the surrounding land. And the bigger the park, the more valuable that land is around it.
Yeah, and now's probably a good time that we can drop the act. So it turns out that I actually don't hate parks. It was a very fun way to get into this episode.
Yeah, we're trying to have fun here.
Yeah, we're trying to have fun. And so this goes directly into a lot of some of the research that I've done kind of on the topic, where I was really curious about, well, why would you ever buy a park, and does it even make sense?
From the top down, right?
Right.
From the city's perspective.
Yeah, or even just like the community's perspective, where if you're looking at like, where's the value? And so some of the research we did, just to reiterate what you basically just perfectly stated, is you can think about the value you get between two options. Say there's one empty lot, you can only do one thing with it, right? What's the next best marginal thing to do with it? When you think about that, you can measure one, property tax and the value of the land itself. You can measure the value of what you put on top of it, but you also want to measure the network effects of what happens around. And so a really good example in this case would be the land of the park does not create any more revenue, does not create any more property tax revenue at all.
In fact, it could almost be negative. You could argue that actually that creates more of a burden on the city or whatever to actually have to to have somebody to take care of that landscaping.
Not only is it no longer an asset of revenue generation from just that perspective, from just that perspective, it's now a liability where money goes in to keep it going. But what I like to, and my hypothesis was before we did all of this research was, I bet the property value of the properties around that park would go up, and I bet it's not like if you're 5 towns over and there's a brand new little wishing well somewhere, then all of a sudden your property value doubles. But I bet it's local, right? You have a nice little area where the closer you are, the more you see the spike, but it tapers off until basically it turns into nothing. And from the research we looked up, it basically turned, that's basically what happened, right? There was a study about there was a raised park built in New York City, I think 10 years ago.
Okay.
I forget the exact name. And obviously, It's an old train line that was up above the ground. They just turned it into a park in a line where you can walk through, and it's really good looking. I've never been, but I hear it's great. And it was pretty obvious that property values had gone up, but they actually measured how much those property values had gone up. I think in some cases it had basically doubled.
And say a little bit more about how they determine the property value, or insofar as you know how that's measured. So
Yeah.
they measured it beforehand. There was some appraisal or something like this.
Not even an appraisal.
Not even
You-
appraisal.
Right, and so if there's an apartment building, you probably can't put a value on the entire property perfectly at any point in time. But what
Right.
you can do is you can just look at like what's the price of the rents in an apartment building, and how does that change over time? And I bet it changes.
So like an average rent for
Right.
that area, or for that building.
Right, and now at the same time, you might look at that, and and this is the other side of that coin is there's also like worries about what's called green gentrification, where if you build a new park, then like it becomes better, and everyone has this sick mind like you, where a park and green space is really nice, but that means that the prices go up because it's more valuable. Richer people come in, and most of those places are rentals, and so if you don't own the property, you don't see the increase in value come back to you. You see that turn into the place you already live becoming more
expensive, right? So it actually
You have to
becomes
move.
harder, less accessible to you.
Right, and that's like the other side of it, right?
The interesting thing, though, is actually to normalize. So let's actually restart a little bit. The implications of having, say, equitable green space actually accounts for quite a bit of the discrepancies in social economic health indicators. I know that's a bit wordy, but the simple form of this is actually accounting for the discrepancies in socioeconomic status. Actually, equitable access to green space, to parks, actually mediates a lot of that,
Yeah.
which is quite interesting. It's intuitive, right?
Yeah, and here's maybe like the one like asterisk I put on that is my guess is that it's almost entirely correlational, and in those cases it's really hard to figure out what's doing what. Where I bet that if you grow up and you're a kid or whatever, and you have access to a park, that's really beneficial in a bunch of ways. But I also bet people know that, and when they're thinking about where am I going to go live, the places with parks get picked up first, right?
And they also track the healthy user bias as well, right? So
Right.
somebody who is more active is more inclined to seek out the park because they're going to use it. They see that as a part of their routine, whether they have a family or not. They're much more attracted to that. So you're right. It's not necessarily that it's a causation-based analysis, but it is interesting the implications on health.
Yeah, and you could also, look at it in the same way that you looked at with your three different walks
Three different
experiment,
ones.
where the amount of stress you felt was the least in the park.
Correct.
And if you just had a little bit of green space, a lot of that stress went down. So you could also think about it that in a city, you get a lot of benefits if everyone's close together. You have a lot of things nearby. You have restaurants, and businesses, and economic activity, and a bunch of cool new people to meet. But on the other side, everyone's very crowded, and you get like urban decay where there used to be trees and now there's not, and everything, there used to be grass and now it's just concrete. And that gets you to the other side where it's so much where you actually need a break from that urban air and that urban location, right? And so on the other side of it, I'd even look at, the green space decreases the constant 24/7 hum of stress that a city can frequently cause.
Right, because there's things like studies into the reduction in noise of a park. I think it's something like decrease in something like 5 to 10 decibels, and so that's considerable. And then also the smells and the sound of birds. All of that is very therapeutic and relaxing, like you said. So it's this whole system now in the park. It's having a lot of these interactions and knock-on effects that are also a little hard to study, right? Like some of these things are hard to isolate and see what exactly is causing what, and
kind of like the other side of that research, or like even trying to figure it out, is when you walk around a place that's beautiful, you just feel it, right? You're like, I feel better, and this is so much better. But it's really hard to say, I feel this, and it affects my health in this way. It's really hard to turn that into a value equation of, here's the actual value of what that means, right?
Right. Here's what my subjective feeling is worth.
Right, and maybe it's something where you can measure it after like a 30-year longitudinal study, and you go, oh yeah, people get cancer at 10 times the rate, or people, drop to like, your lifespan gets decreased by just the constant strain and constant stress. But that takes like 30 years, and people feel that in the moment, right?
And that's very reactive. That's like saying, okay, 30 years later, we know this is bad for us. And 27 years earlier, it would be nice to know that before these people, die, or say there's severe implications to their health, their well-being. So it's like, it's cool to know that. It's good for us, but in the moment, it's also cool to know what's actually going on.
Right,
And we want quick responses to this.
and interestingly, like the term "on the wrong side of the tracks," right? You know that term where it's like the wrong side of the
Right.
tracks. That's like the bad part of town.
Right.
I saw an actual study where they went and they looked at tracks and they looked at health outcomes on either side, and they actually found out that it was almost always, I believe, the eastern side, one of the sides that was consistently the worst side or the lower property value part of town. And it's because winds in that part of America tended to flow the other way. And so you can think about it as the trains go by and they're blowing a bunch of smoke
Right.
into the air. It ends up on one side of the tracks. That turns into air pollution. You can actually measure that in like rates of asthma 40 years later. And you can figure out like, oh, wrong side of the tracks. It was the tracks that did it, right? Just by virtue of there being tracks and a source of pollution.
And a prevailing wind.
Yeah, and just the trend of winds to go one direction over the other in certain regions turned into a really, really replicable finding.
Which is interesting because here in Milwaukee, the property that's furthest east is the most valuable. And so obviously this may have been a little bit different here. It probably was, but that the lake also provides quite a bit of refuge against that.
Yeah, and you can think of the way to think about it is if you live right next to the lake side of you is empty and free and clear and it's quiet, right? It's half the world is just an open expanse of blue. The other half is people.
And this actually is a good segue into blue spaces, which are equally, if not more important than green spaces. So everywhere can have green spaces, but the actual access to the river, to the lake, to the seafront is really profound. I mean, there's something very primal. I don't know if you felt this, but like going by the sea or the water, there's something very relaxing, very calming. It's the sound, it's how it looks. It's also the perspective. It puts things a little bit in this perspective of, okay, I'm not quite as big in this complex world as I think I am. So it's a little bit humbling.
Yeah,
it's a little bit of awe.
You can enjoy the horizon. You can enjoy the sunset, right? Yeah, there's
seagulls.
There's a beautiful moment there. It's like there is nothing. You're so used to there being topography and trees and houses, and then there's just nothing. And you get that moment of nothing, right? Just a beautiful, beautiful moment, right? Actually, kind of going back to what you said about like birds chirping. This is not a study, so please don't quote me. This is a thing I saw on Twitter that I thought was interesting. Is that people had figured out that birds only stop chirping when there's danger. And so humans evolved to listen for birds, and when you can hear kind of like just like the background noise of birds twittering and chirping, it actually calms you down. Because when you can't hear birds twittering and chirping, that means like some large animal has entered the area, or there's a disturbance, and you become more stressed because no birds around you is like a really good, it's almost literally the canary in the coal mine, right?
How does this affect the calm before the storm? So whenever there's a big storm coming, isn't it true that the birds stop? Like there's a sense of calm before something severe hits, like say a tornado or a massive thunderstorm with high winds. Isn't it true that the birds stop, they sense this, and so it's actually also important to listen to them?
Something like, I'm not
but anyway,
sure.
that's a digression.
Yeah.
I think it's an interesting caveat though to what you're saying.
I think there's also a thing where like dogs and cats can feel because when a storm is coming and the wind changes, you can feel the change from like colder to warmer air, and right around that seam of when cold and warm air hits, I think is when a lot of storms get really bad. I think tornadoes are caused by some type of two systems merging, and then right there you get that spin or twist as one goes one way and one's going the other, right? And right along that rift is where they emerge. And I think there's also the change in the electromagnetic field around the Earth that, all these animals. And I bet humans also feel that we're just kind of desensitized because we're always inside. We're as far away from nature as we can get almost all of the time.
But right, this brings it back to why parks and why cities. So nature is very dangerous, as we just mentioned. I mean, there are a lot of things that are not cool about nature. I mean, even a park or a house that's not as well kept, it looks ugly. It's not as it's just pure nature, right? It's pure chaos. But the cool thing about a park is that that walled enclosure, that area of nature that's constrained by some sort of rules or some sort of pattern or some sort of space. And that's what makes it beautiful, right? Because it's at the interplay of the two, not to get too poetic or too philosophical.
We can get
but it's true, right? You understand this, that's the beautiful part about the park. And that's the beautiful part of the city, is that the city, it negotiates these two things. It's these two ends.
And, and I always think that the beauty of a city because cities happen naturally. People start to people cluster around square streets, right? A lot of the cities along Lake Michigan, like Milwaukee, Chicago, Kenosha, we're seeing, you could have predicted where they ended up because all of them have a river that goes in from, right?
Yeah.
And so they all have the land and the lake and a river that allows you to, go between them more effectively. And so they're geographically advantageous, right? And so a lot of people cluster around there because you have the benefits of, we can do land commerce over the river, we can go all the way out to the Atlantic through the Great Lakes and the St. Lawrence Channel.
And then down through the Mississippi.
And then you also have, fertile land where you can farm around the area. And so all those things overlap in this little area and people want to be around there. And people just cluster, people just live close together and figure out, there's enough people now I can, build an inn or a restaurant, or there's enough people, in music and comedy and creative scenes, you kind of need to go to a city because there's not that many people who love those art forms enough to do it, and you just need a critical mass of people before you can get a community going. And that's actually the flywheel of how do you get better, how do you develop talent. You need people working together and bouncing ideas off each other and kind of growing all together. And so those are all obvious benefits of the city. But then the downside is it's disorganized and it's messy and people kind of figure it out. And you can put a factory next to a public, like a kindergarten or something.
Right.
And you have all these problems of economic blight. And what I see as the project of creating beautiful and incredible cities is, how do you achieve all the benefits of the city and then mitigate all the problems, right? Because there's a lot of problems that come, there's a lot of benefits, and you can have both. It's just a difficult project, right? And kind of going back to your point on what is a park? Well, a park is saying it's a walled garden. It's saying we're going to allow nature into this thing that people created, and we're not just going to go up against it. We're going to allow ourselves to grow together. And in the same way that a city is like the urban jungle, it's wilderness of humanity and human creation.
Yeah.
The jungle is the opposite of that, right? It's the jungle, it's the chaos of pure nature. And the harmony when the two of them meet is a really, really beautiful, incredible thing. And I think that's where some of the best cities come from, right? Part of the reason I really like where I live is it's right by the UWM and all that, but there's a bunch of trees on our block, and so it's quieter because they kind of muffle the air, and when the air gets really windy, it slows that down.
And they purify the air as well.
They purify the air. It also makes it quieter because sounds have to go through leaves and trees and not just through open air. Not only that, there's the greenway right next to me, so there's the river, a little river right next to the river, and it's not busy, and there's a beautiful little forest preserve right around the river, so I can go when I'm in wilderness. I take a 2-block walk from me, and I'm in the forest. I'm in an urban forest, and I can go take a long loop, and I can walk in nature, and it's quiet, and I'm alone, and it's a beautiful moment. And then I go 1.5 miles east, and there's the lake, right? So I get all of those things, and they're right there. And then I also have a coffee shop I can walk to.
Yeah.
We can take the bus here, and all of those things are right next to each other, and that's what's so cool. Is like somehow I don't have to negotiate one against the other. I can have everything for some crazy reason. Like I don't know what I did to get so lucky that I found this little, center of the Venn diagram where everything's working out really well.
And it's not perfect, right? So like you can't necessarily have the complete immersion. You can't necessarily do the type of nature where it's just you for miles and maybe you run into a few mountain lions, a few grizzlies. So you fortunately don't have those apex predators here.
Not entirely mountain man. No.
So no, it's not quite that, which is actually quite good and quite helpful as well. So it's nice that you really can try to fit all of this into such a condensed space, right? So you have the benefits of scale. You talked about you can take public transportation, but then it's also the relationships, right? So, professional, personal, you meet all sorts of people, try all sorts of food. It blends all sorts of cultures, and people from all over can come to a city. And even in Milwaukee, right? Even in a small city like this, it's amazing who you'll meet and who's come from afar and from close. So.
Yeah. And figuring out like the balance between all those things, because all of those things, they have to balance. If there's an area that's a forest preserve, you can't build stuff there, right? If there's an area that's a financial district, you can't, have a canyon somewhere in the middle, right? And so even coming back to the idea of like, what do you do with a single plot of land?
Right. How do you zone that? How do you plan around that?
So how do you just make decisions on what do you balance? If there's a plot, do you turn that into a park? Do you turn that into
more apartments?
More apartments, more housing, more business.
Or mixed, right? So
right.
Cafe on the bottom and apartments on top. There is a cool aspect to that where you're fusing these two different types of space, right? So commercial and residential. And it's cool. It's cool when you sometimes can go downstairs and have a coffee and then go back up. There's something both feels very lazy, but also very empowering about that.
Yeah, I mean, I make coffee in my own kitchen. Yeah, but I think kind of what we're getting at is there's a balance to all these things, and figuring out what the best marginal use for something is really requires thinking not just like, well, what would make this single plot better, but think like, what would make the entire thing better?
Yeah, what would make the system better?
Right. The park is a liability on the city, and it's not going to create any property revenue if you're looking at it from that perspective. But the neighborhood around it benefits in a massive way, right? Apartments do the same thing in a different way. You have to figure out, well, and this is another thing is like when the supply of housing in an area increased by like 10%, prices went down by 1%. Another way to think about it is that values went down by 1%. So you can actually kind of start to understand the not in my backyard people trying to say don't build anything, because they're really saying I have a scarce asset, and if you increase the supply, my scarcity decreases. Right?
Oh, right. Or I have a thing that's been artificially scarce, so
yeah.
I want to impose this artificial scarcity.
The value is in the scarcity. It's not in the house itself, the land. It's in that no one else can have it and I have it. And
right.
If I can. And so it's almost the opposite of like the park that spreads out. It's like the area that collapses in, where you have a neighborhood that can't grow and can't become more valuable and can't develop because there's single plots of land that say we specifically lose out at the individual level when the community grows and gets better. And maybe they're not seeing the benefit of, well, the community grows and the neighborhood gets better and the area gets better. And really trying to figure out what's the balance between those things, even in the singular case, even in the marginal case of like, well, what do we value? How does it improve stuff? And how do we make decisions? And how do we figure out what's the smart thing to do with our limited resources?
And it seems like we're both very curious about, cities and design and planning in general. And so we've stumbled across now technical solutions to try and see this. Like, how can we actually record this and monitor this and, mix this together to see, well, what does this actually look like? Like, what is our idea going in, and then how does that change? Where were we wrong? And so that's a cool part of this as well. Like, with my experiment, it's cool to have an idea and then be able to be an agent in that, and then see how that changes. So to see how that changes your framing, and that's ultimately, what we've now started to do with Shepherd Traffic. We want to see what does it look like if we monitor things. If we do things that are a bit unproven or untested, and we can see, does this fit into how this designs the city, into how the planning works?
Right, and that turns into like really being honest and humble about what we understand, right? Having epistemic humility. We think something, but we really want to go out and be able to validate. We want to understand and learn new things that maybe you weren't able to figure out, right? We want to figure out and be as smart as possible about what do you do with every piece of land, because every piece of land of a city is brought on by many different areas. A lot of things overlapping make up every single part of the city, and figuring out how do you turn every little parcel into something that improves the whole.
Yeah,
I think that's probably
I
a
think
good
that's
place
a
to
close out.
Yeah, so thanks so much. I'm Joel Roberts for Shepherd Traffic. Thanks for enjoying this episode.
And I'm Colin Hughes. Thanks for listening today.